Hello everyone. This time I want to present an article to you that Cross Country Magazine, the Paragliding magazine, published about the evolution of Class A wings. These Class A wings, which were usually designed and conceived exclusively for students or very beginner pilots, and where afterward a pilot had to transition or migrate to a more advanced class, say a B or a C, in order to fly better, to fly farther. Well, this concept has been evolving, has been changing, and what we now have is that a Class A can perfectly well be flown from a beginner or a student all the way to a very experienced pilot, without this pilot losing progression in the sport or much performance from their wing, while still being able to maintain a fairly good level of safety. The Class A wings that were previously Class A- used to be considered flying bricks, purely school paragliders that flew very little and that only offered a lot of safety but little performance. Whereas now a Class A, especially the so-called High Class A or A+, A High, which is a scale or a class slightly higher than Class A-, delivers a lot of performance. And some designers even, like the designer at Nova, consider these classes, these A+ classes, practically a Class B in performance, while keeping their level of safety, the safety level of a Class A. Now, we have to distinguish two types of safety when we talk about wing classification. This classification, or certification, refers to passive safety. This means what the paraglider is going to do in an incident, say a collapse, a stall, a negative, by itself, with no reaction whatsoever from the pilot. That's called passive safety. Active safety, on the other hand, is when the pilot reacts. What's going to happen in real life? It's rare that we'll have a collapse and do nothing about it. When we talk about certification, we're talking about passive safety. Usually these Class A wings don't exceed an aspect ratio of 5.3. Let's remember what an aspect ratio is. It's the ratio between the wingspan, the distance between tip and tip, between one wingtip and the other, and the width of the aerodynamic cord. This ratio is going to tell us how safe a paraglider is. Less elongated wings are usually safer wings. They're school wings, Class A or B. The wings that are more elongated are less safe. Now what do you gain? The more elongated a paraglider is, the better its performance, the faster and the better the glide it will have. So passive safety, which is how the paraglider is going to react on its own within a given class, is going to behave more or less the same, because that's what certification tests are for. While active safety will vary depending on the paraglider model. Some paragliders will react better to the pilot's input, and others not so much. Now let's remember 5.3 is the maximum aspect ratio we can have in a Class A. This has been shown empirically. It's not a rule. It's not that if you have a higher aspect ratio, you'll be a higher class, or if you have a lower aspect ratio, you'll be a lower class. It's simply that through testing, wings that have had an aspect ratio higher than 5.3 don't pass the tests to become a Class A. But this gives us a wide range of types of pilots. A Class A can include the beginner, the student, the hike and fly pilot, or the recreational pilot who does have or does need some performance, but is looking for safety. Here we have some examples. The school pilot, usually these A- wings, the wings that are purely for school have an aspect ratio below 5. Then we have some hike and fly wings or mountain wings that also tend to be A, because usually what these pilots want isn't to make big distances, it's to climb a mountain and fly down as safely as possible. They're wings made of very light materials that need to give the pilot a great deal of safety. And we also have the A+ classes, the high A's, which are for pilots who may have finished the course but want to keep flying, or recreational pilots who may have many flight hours a lot of time or many years of experience, but don't want to sacrifice any kind of safety in their flying. And in this new category, so to speak, more and more the sport is developing, and technology and innovation are moving more toward this type of wing, a Class A meant for the pilot, not the student. The main difference between an A- Class A and a hike and fly or mountain Class A is the lightness of the materials. We can also look, besides the aspect ratio, at the number of cells. The more cells a paraglider has, the more advanced it tends to be. The fewer cells it has, meaning the paraglider is more square-shaped, the cells are bigger, and it tends to be more basic. We can see how a school paraglider, a school Class A, has fewer than 40 cells, or intakes. A mountain paraglider can have between 40 and 50, and an A+ can have more than 50 cells. There's also a very specific type of A-wing, which is the wing used by pilots who compete in accuracy landing. And these wings even tend to have even fewer cells, from 20 to 30 cells. They're wings that fly very little, that hold the stall point a lot, and that are meant only for that, not for descending and letting the pilot break the wing a lot and choose exactly where they want to land. But it's a very niche category, and to practice accuracy landing, you don't actually need this kind of very specific wing that also flies very little. Now here's the debate I always push back on with my students, especially the ones who've already been in the sport for a while and get influenced, whether by other pilots, by other schools, or by paraglider brand advertising, into changing category. They fly their Class A perfectly well and are thinking about investing their money and buying a Class B, B low, or B high, or even a C. And I always try to talk them out of doing that if they don't have real and legitimate reasons for making that kind of investment or that kind of paraglider change. Above all, because besides the fact that a Class B is more expensive, the most important thing is that it takes away a lot of safety. The safety, both active and passive, of a Class A is infinitely superior to a Class B, and so on down the line. When we fly a C or a D, safety is very limited. These wings specialize only in performance and sacrifice a great deal of safety. So here are some reasons that some pilots, students, or novice pilots believe are valid for switching wings, and they're not. One of these reasons is, I've already been flying for many years and have to switch wings, and it has nothing to do with that. You can fly a Class A your entire life. I have more than 25 years flying, and I prefer to fly a Class A because I enjoy myself, because I'm not worried about the risk, because I can do other things, take photos, make videos, guide a student while I fly a Class A. It gives me a lot more freedom. And as I said, these A+ classes now fly much more than before. They fly practically like a B. I also hear this a lot, because all my friends fly a more advanced class. And this makes no sense, right? Even though this is a sport for adults, sometimes the reasons I hear aren't very adult ones, but they're the most common. You shouldn't let yourself be swayed by the group, or flying buddies or friends. Their reasons might be good, might be bad, but they shouldn't influence our own decision, because on top of that, our own life is at stake. Some tell me, no, it's that I feel safer in a more advanced class. And this, sure, the feeling of safety might indeed be greater in a more advanced class. Let me explain. More advanced wings tend to have more pressure in the brakes. You're flying. You brake a little and it feels stiffer, harder to fly, or even some models collapse less frequently than a Class A. And that gives a false sense of safety. The thing is, it might give you the feeling that this more advanced paraglider doesn't collapse, or collapses less, but when it does collapse, it's going to take much longer to reopen, both passively and actively. That's what the paraglider's safety depends on. It's not the feeling it gives me, but really how it's going to behave in a serious incident. I also hear this a lot because I want to progress in the sport, as if buying yourself a paraglider would help you fly better, or as if having a very basic paraglider would limit you from being able to fly as high, as far, as long. And that's false. The paraglider doesn't have much to do with your progression as an athlete. What matters more is what you study, what you read, what you practice, what you fly, the flight hours you have. And very little is the paraglider factor. As the saying goes, it's the archer, not the arrow.
On top of that, this argument is unfortunately used by some schools or some instructors who want to push their student into buying another paraglider. They tell them, if you want to keep learning, if you want to keep progressing, buy yourself a more advanced paraglider. And that's false. A fallacy they use as a sales pitch so they can keep selling their paragliders. Really, the true advice is, you want to keep learning, you want to progress in the sport, then fly more often. Fly, try to fly longer, try to fly higher, learn more, don't buy something. In other words, with money in this sport at least, you can't solve a progression issue. The only thing you have to do is practice more. This is very similar to because I want to fly better, I want to fly higher than farther. None of that matters. It's true a more advanced wing has a bit more performance, but you have to somehow weigh it. It's going to give you more performance, but it's going to take away safety. By taking away safety, it's going to take away confidence, take away peace of mind. You could even end up flying less because in some thermal or wind conditions you'd rather not fly, and in the end you'll practice less. The end result might be that you invested a lot of money and you're going to fly worse than before. Because I don't fly as far as high as my friends. I hear that a lot too, and it's the same belief that the paraglider has a big influence on your flying level. There is a certain degree of influence like with everything, but it's minimal. The most important thing is to practice, and the worst thing you can do is start comparing yourself to other pilots and their paragliders. So, what should the two best reasons be, or causes or motivations, for buying a more advanced wing? In my opinion, there are basically two, because you want to compete in paragliding, say professionally or semi-professionally, in a paragliding competition, say an FAI Category 1 or an FAI Category 2. The vast majority of pilots are going to have advanced wings, a C-wing, a D-wing, or even more, the most advanced of all, which is the CCC competition category. If you show up with an A, you'll obviously be at a big disadvantage. However, there's also now a trend toward opening categories for lower certified wings. But if you want to be ranked, if you want to be a professional pilot, you'll have no choice but to end up flying a super advanced wing. And for that path, you have to go step by step. If you start with an A, you buy a B, a C, a CCC, but let's say your path as a paraglider pilot is the competitive one. If you don't plan to go to international competitions, if you don't plan to become a paragliding pilot who's professional and competitive, then it doesn't make much sense. And the other reason is that if you're already a very experienced pilot and say you're in the fight to fly farther and farther and make impressive distances, say distances of more than 100 kilometers, flying 200, 300, 400 kilometers, then having a more advanced wing, without obviously going all the way to a CCC competition wing, having a C-wing or a D-wing is going to help you because you'll obviously cover more distance. It's a matter of numbers. A wing that glides better, that goes faster, will get farther over the course of the day, but it's also an extreme case. It's a case that very few pilots in the world manage to reach or want to reach. If your goal is to be a recreational pilot, to enjoy flying, to fly cross-country, yes, but not excessively long ones, say 20, 30, 40 kilometers, a Class A is more than enough. You don't need to keep climbing up the wing classification. Where's the biggest difference between an A+, a high class, and a Class B? We're not going to find this difference at trim speed. In other words, hands up, they'll practically fly the same. We're not going to find it at a medium percentage of speed bar either, say 30, 40, 50%. Both fly the same, both glide more or less the same. Where there really is a big difference is when we get close to 100% speed bar. And there are two things that a Class A, no matter how advanced it is, no matter how high, won't increase its speed much. It will increase by 6 to 10 kilometers per hour, whereas a Class B tends to increase more, up to 12 kilometers per hour. And the second difference, and maybe the most noticeable, the one we'll feel the most, is our glide ratio. In a Class B, when we're fully on speed bar, say, it's not that bad. Whereas with a Class A fully on speed bar, we will feel that the paraglider doesn't perform as well, it drops a lot. The sink rate or the glide ratio suffers a lot at full speed bar.
When are we going to fly at full speed bar? Usually in not-so-common conditions. When we make a transition, whether on a Class B or a Class A, we usually use 30 or 40%. We only use 100% speed bar when we have a strong headwind. So while this difference is real, while a Class B does perform better than a Class A when fully on speed bar, it's a circumstance, a minority situation in normal flying. In normal flying hands up or with little speed bar, both wings perform practically the same. But we have the advantage that a Class A is much safer than a Class B. Some other advantages of a Class A are that it practically has the same performance as a Class B-, and that in some regulations in some countries it's forbidden to teach or learn paragliding with a Class B, even a B-. So a Class A that performs the same as a B stays within the law, while a B can't be used for school. That's something you'd have to check in your regulations, your national legislation, to see whether you can learn on a Class B or not. What's the reason why Class A wings now fly almost the same as a Class B? This cross-country magazine article mentions 3 important aspects. The first is the lightness of the materials. Technology has advanced a lot in paragliding when it comes to materials. They keep getting lighter, they last longer, and this lightness allows a basic paraglider to have quite decent performance. Then we have these nitrile rods that go in the intakes, in the cells of the paraglider, which let the profile hold its shape longer, and allow for a profile that's much more sophisticated with simple designs. Before, they used a semi-rigid fabric material that made the paraglider very heavy, and also deformed the profile a lot, which kept us from having a basic class with good performance. And the other factor is the internal technology of the factories, of the designers, who use a lot of simulation software so they can run many tests on the aerodynamic profiles. So we have software, we have materials, both fabric and the materials of the rods in the cells, which allow the profile to be more efficient, safer, and to have fewer deformations. Another factor that's helped make Class A wings safer is that the smaller the paraglider was, meaning if we compare the same model, the same brand, between a large paraglider and a small one. The small paraglider tended to be more violent. Some paragliders that were an A in large ended up being a B in small sizes, but this has been getting corrected thanks to technology and the development of profiles. And now practically all the sizes of the same model share the same certification and the same safety characteristics. Here are some examples of pilots who have made impressive distances. 323 kilometers on a Class A, which is the Skywalk Mescal 6. Another testimony from a pilot who's had 30 years flying, similar to mine. I too, when I was younger, used to fly advanced wings, and now I prefer to fly Class A wings. This pilot also, so to speak, made the leap back from flying advanced wings to flying a Class A, where he feels more comfortable when flying in strong wind or strong thermal conditions. Now we do have to be careful. We shouldn't let a class, no matter how safe it is, give us a false sense of safety. A Class A, while it is safe, still needs all the necessary precautions to fly. Paragliding isn't something magical. It's not something that's going to save us just because it's a Class A. We shouldn't overestimate the safety of a paraglider based on its classification or its certification. All wings collapse, and if we collapse close to the mountain, no matter how fast this collapse reopens, it could happen that we hit the mountain before the paraglider reopens. We always have to focus on flying well, on following our procedures, and keeping our safety margins, no matter if our paraglider is the safest Class A on the market. We can't fall into this false sense of safety and just let ourselves go. We always have to stay alert when we fly. At the end of all this, and based on this magazine's article and my own experience, I hope that paragliding, which is a relatively young sport, it must be about 30 years old, keeps maturing and goes down this path, this road of perfecting its technology, not so much toward increasingly advanced competition wings, which very few pilots fly, and which also cause a lot of accidents. Instead, going down the road of increasingly perfecting the basic classes, the A- or A+ classes, making them with lighter materials, easier to carry, and also, if possible, making them more and more affordable. That would be the ideal this sport should have. Wings that are increasingly safer, more reliable, and more accessible. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it.